Ryan Flynn stepped into the Environment Secretary job last spring, and he may well be confirmed during this legislative session. And Mr. Flynn sat down with NMIF correspondent Gwyneth Dolan to talk about water quality, the jet fuel plume at Kirtland Air Force Base, and a controversial set of new rules for copper mines that environmental advocates say gives mining companies more leeway to pollute groundwater.
Ryan Flynn, thank you for being with us here today. We're going to talk about the environment, and a lot of these things boil down to water right now. Water is our top topic in the environment. Even if it's not yours, it's the one we've been talking about the most. About 1/3 of the state's rivers and streams right now fail to meet water quality standards. And last year, you and Governor Martinez announced support for improving water quality in the state's rivers. She said she plans to request $1.5 million from the legislature this session for the River Stewardship Program. I'm wondering, will that money come from capital outlay on her part, or will she ask the legislature for an allocation?
Water, thank you for having me, first of all. Water is absolutely one of our top priorities as well. So with respect to the rivers and streams, the $1.5 million will come from capital outlay. We are also trying to work with interested stakeholders like the Audubon Society and get other legislators to consider contributing toward that money. So hopefully we can get even more than $1.5 million for the River Stewards program that Governor Martinez announced. Getting that money will allow us to leverage federal dollars that we have under the Clean Water Act. So even though we will get $1.5 million, if we were only able to get $1.5 million, we'll still be able to leverage that $1.5 million against our Clean Water Act grant, and that will get us about $3 million in federal money. It's a good first step. Certainly a lot of work needs to be done on restoring our rivers, but I think this infusion of money can really do some outstanding work.
Speaking of the legislative session, you're hoping to be confirmed come this session, is that right?
Yes, yes.
You've been on the job since last April, did you say?
Yes.
All right, and you came from the Environment Department as the General Counsel, wasn't that right?
That's right.
How long were you there doing that?
I came in shortly after Governor Martinez took office. I came in January or February of 2011. I was the General Counsel and the Legislative Coordinator for right up until April, when the Governor appointed me as the Cabinet Secretary.
Now, you had a connection through your old law firm to the company that does most of the copper mining in New Mexico. We've heard a lot about this. We asked for questions from people on Facebook and heard some stuff about this. The New Mexico Water Quality Control Commission approved new rules about copper in September, despite protests from two environmental groups, Ted Turner's ranch people, the New Mexico Attorney General's office, and the former Environment Department Bureau Chief who was hired to craft that rule. They all said that the state essentially allowed the copper mining company to write its own rules and pollute the groundwater as much as it wants. They also said that because of your connection to that firm, it is like the fox guarding the hen house. Is that fair?
No. I mean, first of all, it's not. It's absolutely not true. Second of all, I don't think that's in any way accurate about what the rules actually do. I don't think the rules allow pollution of our groundwater resources. The fact is that the rules that the Environment Department proposed and that the Water Quality Control Commission adopted are the most stringent rules in the country. We compared the rules that we proposed against all the other copper producing states in the West, and our rules were more environmentally protective and more comprehensive than any other copper producing state in the West. Absolutely, I worked for the Module Sperling law firm. I'm very proud of the work I did there and the people I worked with there. Module Sperling did represent Freeport-McMoRan at one point. I never, while I was at Module Sperling, represented Freeport-McMoRan or any other mining company for that matter. I did, however, represent a number of different small businesses. I represented some large corporations as well. I represented some nonprofit groups while I was there. I worked with some outstanding colleagues, including members that occasionally appear on this program, like The Line, like Laura Sanchez. She was one of my colleagues when I was at Module Sperling. So I don't think the fact that I worked at Module it prevents me from being able to do my job at the Environment Department in a way that's completely unbiased and unprejudiced. When I got to the Environment Department as the General Counsel, I made sure to recuse myself from participating in any matters that were involving my old law firm, just because I thought the appearance of impropriety or of a potential bias was very important. So for the first year while I was at the Environment Department, I did not participate in any matters involving module spurling.
I think what folks were talking about, even if you weren't directly involved, that Module represented Freeport before the Water Quality Control Commission, NMED, and the courts, pushing for provisions that sounded a lot like the rules that the board ended up passing.
I don't think that's accurate. I think the fact of the matter is that there was a process that we went through in order to develop the rules. During that process, we worked with environmental stakeholders, we worked with academics, and we worked with industry. The overwhelming majority of the rule, which is over 40 pages long, and that's single-spaced in 10-point font. I mean, this is a very comprehensive and detailed rule. The overwhelming majority of the rule was actually not in dispute during the hearing. The parties agreed on well over 3/4 of the rule that the Environment Department proposed and that the the Water Quality Control Commission ultimately adopted. But like any process, there was not a 100% consensus. I think what you're seeing here with the copper rule is similar to any environmental issue that we've come across here in the state in the past at least 5 years since I've been paying attention, and where you have a disconnect between some of the political posturing and political machinations and the actual science and what's in the actual substance of the rule itself.
Let me pause you there to say, isn't it true that in 2010 Freeport paid the state $13 million to settle claims that it had contaminated thousands of acres of groundwater near its mines?
Freeport did, they did a settlement agreement with the natural resource trustee for the state for contamination related to some of the mine sites, absolutely.
So it's a legitimate concern for people who live near these mines who are worried about their groundwater, isn't it?
It's what's a legitimate concern?
That the copper mining pollutes it.
Absolutely. I mean, any mine is going to have an environmental impact, no doubt about it. So anyone that lives near a mine or that cares about the environment should be interested in what the Environment Department's doing in order to protect the groundwater. So absolutely, that's a legitimate concern. The fact is, with what we're doing with Freeport-McMoRan here, I think you've kind of pointed to exactly why the rules that we've proposed was so important. What the Environment Department was doing in the past under the previous leadership was not working. It was not protecting the groundwater. The legislature recognized in 2009 when it adopted an amendment to the Water Quality Act that mandated that IGO, the Environment Department, go back and reconsider how we were regulating copper mines, that we go back and do something that was not arbitrary and that was not inconsistent. And this was also in response to a Court of Appeals decision in 2006, where the Court of Appeals said that the way the Environment Department was regulating the mining industry, specifically was regulating Freeport-McMoRan, was unrealistic. That was the word that the Court of Appeals used. They also used the term impractical.
But here's what I don't understand. A former bureau chief at NMED, who was there through 5 administrations and tons of time, he said that he thought the new rules were illegal. He said that you guys were giving across-the-board exemptions for pollution from copper mines and said it was a sweet deal. So, here's a career bureaucrat in the department saying this is totally not cool. That doesn't sound political, does it?
Well, I think it's very political, and I think the process has been absolutely politicized. I would analogize this to the debate over climate change. The climate change debate is a political debate. It's not a scientific debate. Nobody doubts there's no scientist who doubts that climate change is occurring. And I think that we have here the most environmentally protective copper mining rule in the country. And that former bureau chief was at the helm when the groundwater was being polluted, when the Environment Department was not effectively regulating this industry. So I find it difficult to understand how we would continue to advocate for a system which we acknowledge is broken and which, more importantly, both the court and the legislature has acknowledged is broken.
Let's talk about climate change.
Sure.
I imagine that you might get a couple of questions on this when you go for your confirmation, maybe. Climate change is something that obviously has such a huge impact on the entire planet, but when we look just here at New Mexico, a lot of people want to know, what can we do here to deal with the impacts that we're seeing in terms of, not enough rain and not enough snow and more fire and species, moving out of their historic ranges and coming out at the wrong times of year and things like that. What are you doing in your department to prepare for these kinds of changes?
Well, I think it's not only our department, but I think it's what Governor Martinez has done. We brokered the most important environmental agreement in the history of the state, and that involved the San Juan Generating Station and the retirement of 2 of the 4 coal-fired units at the San Juan Generating Station. That agreement alone will result in the most significant decrease in greenhouse gas emissions in the history of the state. It'll also save the state millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars. And the result of that will allow us to diversify our energy portfolio. Those 2 coal-fired units which will come offline will be replaced by lower emissions sources like renewable energy, as well as nuclear and natural gas. So I think what the state is doing is we are looking for ways to diversify our energy portfolio. And the landmark agreement that we've reached at the San Juan Generating Station, I think is a huge step in the right direction. What can individuals do? I think with climate change, with greenhouse gases, just like any other waste or with conserving water, we can be aware of how our actions impact the environment.
Speaking of oil and gas and energy, a lot of folks are telling us that they're very worried about fracking. And we've had fracking here in New Mexico for a while now.
Since the 40s.
Yeah, but people are really worried because they keep seeing, increased seismic activity in other areas. They're very concerned about pollution of the groundwater from some of the chemicals involved. What are you doing to allay New Mexicans' concerns about fracking near them?
Well, I need to point out that that fracking is an issue that's handled by my colleague over at the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resource Department. We don't regulate the oil and gas industry for groundwater protection. That's done by the Oil Conservation Division. So that's handled, like I said, by Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resource Department. But I think I absolutely agree with you that fracking is an issue that has been getting a lot of attention, both here locally and nationally. I was traveling over the holidays, and when I was in Arizona and in Connecticut, one of the first questions that people asked me about was fracking. I think that in New Mexico, we're unique in that we have, like you said, we've been dealing with this issue since the 40s. We have a mature regulatory environment that really understands this industry and understands how to regulate this industry. I think that there are things that we're doing as a state that involving fluid disclosure that I think are really important to really help educate the public about exactly what this process entails and what's involved. I'm not aware of any documented cases of groundwater contamination resulting that have been caused by fracking. But it's
is that in New Mexico or
in the country? But it's an important issue. I also think it's important to step back and think about kind of some of the larger forces that are at work here with fracking and kind of why this debate is becoming so important. I think on one hand, it's important to us in the West because of water and any type of activity, mining or oil and gas production that could potentially impact water is something that we have to take seriously. So it is an important issue for us, but it's been an important issue for us for a long time. I think though, kind of from the larger perspective, there's a desire to move away from traditional sources of energy like fossil fuels toward more renewable energy sources. So I think some of the discussion on fracking really involves this kind of debate that we're having. I think oil and gas, natural gas especially right now, where we have just really increased production levels and decreased prices, is viewed by many, including the Obama administration, as being a bridge between coal-fired generation and renewable energy generation. That this is going to be a good way to kind of transition from dirtier sources of energy toward cleaner sources with our abundant natural gas reserves. And I think by people who are proponents of renewable energies, that they don't want to see us move from coal to natural gas. They want us to move from coal to renewable energy. So I think kind of the forces of where our energy future is going in the United States.
Let me just move back to fracking for 1 minute. You said you weren't aware of any contamination, but we have seen news stories recently about contamination near fracking. And I think this is part of what leads to folks, especially here in Albuquerque, who are worried for many reasons about the quality of their drinking water, especially because of the Kirtland fuel spill. A couple months ago, 2 citizen groups asked the Federal Environmental Protection Agency to step in and take care of this leaking fuel from the base because they said that you guys and the Air Force are not doing enough to protect Albuquerque's drinking water from contamination. What are you doing?
Well, let me point out first of all that the Kirtland fuel spill has nothing to do with fracking. So let me make that clear.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It resulted from a bulk fuel facility and a leak that occurred, and we're not exactly sure when it occurred, but we believe it was in about the 60s when the leak occurred, and it contaminated the ground for years. It was first discovered in
toward drinking water wells. So what are you doing about it now?
Well, we're doing more than has ever been done before to address this issue. It is slowly migrating toward drinking water wells. And the very first day that I took over as the Cabinet Secretary of the Environment Department, the first meeting I had was with the Air Force. I also met with the Albuquerque-Bernalillo Water Utility Authority on my first day on the job. And I wanted to find out what more we could be doing to address this spill. The Environment Department has been doing a lot of great investigation work in order to understand the nature and the extent of the contamination. It's not, it's underground, so it's not like a tanker that spilled on the side of the road.
Right?
Yes. And so you have to understand the nature of the problem before you can start designing a way to clean up the problem. So we have done a lot of great work over the years to study the spill. But I agree that we needed to be doing more. And so one of the things
you just approved this vacuum system designed to suck up some of this fuel, but it's not performing as well as you'd hoped. It's only sucking up the fuel at half the rate about you thought it would.
So let me tell you what we're doing. That's one of the things. So what we're doing is we've done a lot of great investigation work, but where we really need to move forward is actual removing contaminants from the ground. And so we have been using, the Air Force has been using a soil vapor extraction system that helps remove some of the contaminants that are in the area between the aquifer, between the groundwater and the surface. They call that the vadose zone. And so we have been using a soil vapor extraction system. It is working. It's not working as efficiently as either the Environment Department or the Air Force would like, but the system is working. It's extracting fluid from the ground. I think we've extracted over 200,000 gallons of contamination from the ground through that soil vapor extraction system so far. But what we're doing is 3 different things. Number one, since I started, we've announced aggressive interim measures, and these are measures that the Environment Department can require the Air Force to implement immediately. There's a larger regulatory framework here that we need to follow step by step before we can require them to implement what are the kind of the final measures to clean up the spill. But through these interim measures, we can implement ways to address the contamination right away. So we've called upon, first of all, to greatly expand the soil vapor extraction system that you just mentioned.
The one that's kind of working.
Well, it's working. It's not working as efficiently as we would have liked, but the system is working. It's pulling contamination from the ground. But what we'd like to do is increase the size of that soil vapor extraction system. So we've called upon the Air Force to increase the soil vapor extraction efforts by the end of the first quarter of this year, by the end of March. Second, what the soil vapor extraction system does not address is the contamination that's actually made it into the groundwater. And so that's the second key component here. We need to begin addressing the contamination that's in the groundwater, which is slowly migrating toward the spill. And so far, since we first detected the contamination in the groundwater in 2007, the Environment Department has not moved forward to actually start extracting any of the contamination that's in the groundwater. And so I think we're ready right now to begin aggressively starting to address the contamination in the water. And so we've required the Air Force to implement a system by the end of June of this year to start treating the contaminants that actually made it into the groundwater. And so those are kind of immediately the action items we're taking. We are taking aggressive action right away to start trying to deal with this contamination now.
We've got just about a minute left. I want to flip to a totally different topic. Just one short question. We've been talking on this program lately about the proposed horse slaughter facility down in southern New Mexico. One of the most recent concerns about this facility is water quality near it, and will this facility pollute water? Is there a legitimate concern about water quality near this slaughter facility?
You know, I have to kind of tell you a little bit about the process and where we're at. I'm currently the decision maker. Yeah. So that's an issue that is currently being addressed, and I cannot at this point comment on what the ultimate outcome of the groundwater discharge permit process will be. It would be inappropriate for me. There's a hearing. The company has applied for a permit. There was a hearing on that permit. Evidence was gathered during that hearing. The hearing officer made a recommendation to me earlier this week. The parties still have
that there would be too much pollution and that they shouldn't.
No, her recommendation was that there would not be, and you know that recommendation is her recommendation. The parties are still commenting on it. She recommended denying the permit, but the basis in which she based her recommendation was not on the potential environmental contamination. It was based purely on her belief that the company had a history of non-compliance with the environmental rules. It was not based on a concern over contamination of the groundwater.
So we're going to have to wait and see where that goes.
So I can't, I would not be able to make a decision until I get the evidence, and that'll be probably about 60 days.
Ryan Flynn, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.